Hey, spiralers, welcome back to the studio. We are so excited to have manifested such an incredible guest. I can't tell you how much Gina and I have exchanged memes from this very artist. And so today, please give us a warm welcome to the author, poet, creative strategist, and meme artist behind the account we all love. Words are vibrations, Mr. James McCrae. Woohoo!
Hey, Sam. Hey, Gina. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
It feels like almost it feels so surreal to talk to the person that we've been consuming the art of for so long. It's kind of
Hmm.
like it's like going behind stage or something. Like
Yeah.
we
A
never get to
backstage
do this.
pass.
Backstage passes. Yeah.
Well, that's fun because, I just sit in my room and make memes, or I sit in coffee shops and make memes on my computer by myself. And, it's just for me very casual and like what I enjoy doing, like between things, really. So I'm just happy that that you guys like my posts and that Instagram can be such a place of connection and introducing us to people that we wouldn't be introduced to otherwise.
Exactly. I mean, you have literally filled up my entire camera roll of like screenshots and like my saved folders because
Mm,
you share so many hard hitting truths that resonate with so many of us. And you've made Instagram such an art friendly, happy place to be. And I'm
yeah.
curious if you're aware that people have essentially dubbed you like the father of spiritual memes.
Well, I mean, that makes me happy to hear that. I think that there are definitely some people that made memes before me, um, but yeah, I guess I was kind of early on. I feel like there's memes that are it's just a lot more common to see memes these days. Like I feel like
Hmm.
memes are just all over and a lot of them aren't even that good because I feel like just like there's so many
True.
memes now. Um so I kind of actually stepped away from memes for a while and I kind of had to refine my voice and kind of step back into the game in a new way and maybe even a more elevated way. um but yeah, I mean, I think I'm part of a meme movement. I think that there's been a handful of us, such as, well, like my friend Bunny Michael has been making memes
Oh,
since
love
the
her.
Love her.
like the mid 2010s. And So there's a few of us, but yeah, I do see Instagram as being, I'm interested. I mean, I'm a student of art history, and I like to look back at art history and see what different generations considered art, and like it's always changing and people are always making art with the tools and technology of their time.
Hmm.
So on one hand, we might look at social media and Instagram and the internet and think that it's a little bit frivolous, or it is not serious art, or it's content, right? It's not art.
Right.
But like social media is where people meet and gather and exchange ideas and communicate and present themselves to the world. So these are the tools and technologies of our time. So I'm really interested in like what is art and writing and poetry and wisdom that's native to social media. What does that look like? So kind of combining the more artistic and philosophical and poetic and spiritual ideas with this internet culture of memes and like snarky content and like um short form writing. So I find it, it's social media can be annoying, and it's annoying for me sometimes as well, and it's sucks to you know be subject to the whims of the algorithm. But overall, I think for me it's a fun sandbox for creativity and for expression.
I love how you called it a sandbox because it does feel
Yeah.
like a playground, but a playground is also where like bullying can happen, right? Where people can feel like left out, but it's also the place where, yeah, the more yourself you are, the more find people who also want to go on the swings or also want to go on this. And so I love how you position that, because I think, social media has kind of a bad rap sometimes, but I think when, we use it appropriately in a really conscious way, it can also be such a connector. And I think that's what's been so cool about your content, that it's actually connected us to so many of our people and our audience. And I have a group coaching program for Asian women creatives, and one I called it Metamorphosis. And so I got sent that butterfly and caterpillar one that you made like so many times, and we just keep sending it in our group. And so it's just really been such a beautiful way for us to share what we feel and what we're experiencing, but through something that you created. So yeah, thanks for following the thread on starting this whenever that was.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. And yeah, I think that, I just think that what a meme is, it's supposed to be like, a meme is supposed to like be the shortest way to communicate an idea. It's like a viral idea, or the smallest unit of an idea. So it's great for with a meme, just to try to distill a concept down to its essence. Like
Yeah.
the butterfly talking to the caterpillar after it emerges from the cocoon, or whatever, um and just to show that, change and growth and evolution and metamorphosis are not only it's not only okay, it's perfectly normal, and it's part of nature.
Yeah.
So it's fun. It's almost like a comic where you're trying to just like communicate something in a very short visual way.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they always have these like deep felt somatic truths, and your memes have almost become this way of people finding their people. Like if
Yes.
Wow.
someone shares your meme and then they see it, they're like, "Oh my god, like this is my person." Like they get
Yes.
it, right? Like when I see someone posting words or vibrations memes, I'm like, "Those are my people." And that's just an interesting, funny byproduct of the work that you've done. But I'm really curious to go back in time and kind of chart your creative journey, because what I would love for listeners to really tap into and get curious about is their own creativity and where they may have blocked themselves. Because your newest book, The Art of You, is all about honing and cultivating this natural creative well that exists within all of us. But people might look at your memes and your page and think, oh, he's so creative, I'm not. Right. And how does he create things so easily? And I wonder if creativity was always natural to you, but ultimately, how to get people to tap into their own creativity, because that's really what you've inspired in us.
Yeah. Well, I think creativity, um it does come naturally to me, but I think it really comes naturally to all of us. And I mean that word, naturally, very intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not always in tune with our own nature, or we live in a society that is not always conducive for us to be in touch with our own nature. So we get separated from ourselves, and therefore we also get separated from our creativity. And
Mm.
like there's a great quote that's like, the artist is the child who survived. So
Oh,
it's
I love
like,
that.
I think like the inner artist and the inner child are related. Like how connected with you your how connected are you with your inner child? And I think that's a good barometer of how in touch you are with your own creativity. Because
Mm-hmm.
at its essence, if I had to like distill creativity down to like one quality, it would be curiosity. And like curiosity and play and experimentation without agenda. Like
Mm.
it's not about like solving a problem, or like knowing exactly like how to like solve this puzzle, or it's not like engineering where there's a specific way to do it to reach a certain outcome. I think that it's about dancing with the unknown.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that every creative process is a journey into the unknown. So it's about being comfortable with that and like finding your way forward. And that starts with intuition. I think that cultivating your intuition is if not the most important, thing you can do as a artist of any sort. Because like I'm not even joking about this, like the best ideas I have just pop into my head subconsciously. or
Yeah.
I meditate, and then I'll just like, or I'm going for a walk in nature, and I'll just like have this idea that pops into my head, and I just like jot it down in my notes app, and then that later becomes anything like a meme or a chapter in a book or a poem or whatever. So it's so important just to be in tune with our own intuition. And for me, it's about listening more than it's about thinking. Because again, it's
Hmm.
not about solving a problem, it's about listening to that inner voice that's kind of always speaking to us. But if our mind is too active with like this egoic kind of like analytical lizard brain
Mhm.
um thinking, then we don't hear the voice of our own intuition. So I like to say that a mind that's too full of information has no space for inspiration. So for me,
Yes.
like there's no creativity for me without mindfulness, because that is what
Yeah.
kind of opens up that portal and then that channel of inspiration. Um, and then at the same time, like, I think that creativity is it's such a useful part of life for everyone, no matter where they are in their own life or creative journey. Like, even if you never share your work, even if you never publish it on Instagram, or you're not trying to build your brand or whatever, you have a job, you have a family, whatever, there is still a lot of benefits to having a creative practice, just because I think it's a healing modality, and it connects us with our inner child, which just allows us
Mhm.
to navigate life in a new way. You can apply creativity to everything.
Yeah.
Um, but also, like, if you do want to be a good artist, or if you do want to be a content creator, or you do want to be an entrepreneur, or publish a book or whatever it is, it's just so important to practice, practice, practice. Like,
Mm.
I've been writing since I was a kid. I've been playing around with graphic design for 15 years. um, so I have a lot of practice, and I have a lot of work and writing that no one ever saw and no one ever will see, right? So it takes a lot of,
Mm.
like, I like to say, like, if you want to be a good artist, you have to be a bad artist first.
Yes.
Like, you can't
Yeah.
bypass those steps. So it's like, if you feel like, oh, I'm not creative, I'm not talented, well, talent is not really, I mean, some people are just like born super talented, but that's
Yeah.
that's not always the case. Like, most
No.
people, talent is just repetition. And it's like, you
Yeah.
find, there's a great quote by the jazz musician Miles Davis. He said, "Sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself."
Wow.
Ooh.
So it's about
Well,
Love
putting in
that.
that work and that repetition and like that practice, and kind of getting the bad art out of the way, so you're ready to make the good art.
Well, most people
yeah.
stop at the bad art. And it's so interesting.
Right.
Like, I have a 9-year old, and I love watching her create,
Yeah.
from 2 years old. Just she would set up her table with her fake food, and she'd make these menus. She always has all these different businesses creates. Like, she was a detective one day, and all these different things. And she has such a wild creativity. It's just so raw, and there is no agenda. And she has no attachment to anything she creates. She's not like, well, yesterday I was a detective, so today I can't, now be whatever, a pop star. It's so wild. It's just this unabashed expression of who she really is. And I grew up not like that. I was a very creative being inherently, I think, as all children are, but my parents did not nurture that at all. If anything, it was kind of like they like snuffed out the flame, and were trying to channel me into a very structured form of creativity, like learning piano and learning music theory. And it really took all the fun out of it, which then I think taught me that creativity doesn't have fun. It is just for purpose. And so, what was your journey like? You said that you were writing for so long. Was that part of you really nurtured growing up? What was like that? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, in the sense that, I grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere. Like, I grew up in a really small town in like rural Minnesota. And the benefit of that, like I wasn't exposed to a lot of the things that you get exposed to if you're grow up in New York City or LA, and it's like there's so much around you that you can culture that you can take in and create with, and having opportunities, um, you know, and having creative people around you. So I didn't have a lot of that, but I just had freedom to just kind of like there wasn't a lot of pressure to get in the right school or to
Mm-hmm.
like be successful in a certain career, just because in a small town in the middle of nowhere that's less of a focus.
Right.
So I did have a lot of freedom just to create, just to see where that took me. And I think it's important to have purpose as well. At least it was for me, to find that, because I used to just make art, and like I used to paint and write poetry and all these things, and I didn't want to go to college because I just wanted to be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm like, I don't want to go to school. I just want to make art, and like I'll be discovered or some things like this. And it's like, so I didn't have any purpose to my art. So it's like it's while you're creating, during like the creative process, it's good not to have like too much of an agenda. You want it to unfold how it wants to unfold. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that like how you approach your creativity in your life, um it's helpful to have a purpose. So like for me, that meant like going to graphic design college and like learning how to channel my creativity in a way that was serving a purpose beyond just myself. And even now it's like, okay, I'm not just writing for myself necessarily, I'm writing to like help others like find
Mhm.
something within themselves, or to tap into their own creativity or their own mindfulness and their own healing and expansion. um, so I've learned to like I call it creative dharma. Like what is your creative dharma? Like what is the purpose that you are here to fulfill, and how can you use creativity to help you actualize that dharma,
Mm-hmm.
and use it as a form of service in the world? Because I think I think that for a long time creativity was about like individual genius. Like we look at
Yeah.
some of the
Totally.
past artists that were really like put on a pedestal, whether that's Shakespeare or Picasso or Ernest Hemingway. They're like these like brilliant geniuses that like made great art. And I think that's just not really what the world needs now. I think the world needs like people to be of service and people to help apply creativity to making the world a better place, and to
Mm-hmm.
help each other heal, and to hold space for each other to learn and to grow and to connect. So I love that intersection now of purpose and creativity, and applying it to something
Yeah.
that's greater than yourself.
Mm.
That is so beautiful. And it actually answers the question I had, because I was going to ask essentially about people who feel really blocked in their creativity because they're too attached to the outcome or what the creation means about them. And I think what you're explaining here is that when our creation is wrapped in service or is channeled in the purpose of service, it's not so much about like what the creativity does for you, because you're right, we did live in this paradigm before where it's like, oh my god, like he's a genius, right? Because he created this piece of music or this artwork. And what I'm seeing, it's that's changing the tides now with especially your writing and your creativity. It's not really about like, look at me, James, I'm so artistic, I'm so smart. It's, is this helping you? Like, is
Mhm.
consuming this of assistance to you? And that's what I feel too about Bunny Michael. I don't feel like she's trying to like look like a cool meme artist, right? That just happened to be her medium to explain messages that were meant to be helpful. And so I think that if I wonder if what you're saying is that if people are having a really hard time with feeling like, oh, but what if it's not good? and like what if it sucks, or what if people think it's bad. I think maybe we can actually circumvent all of that by not making the art about us so much at all.
That's very true. And the analogy that came to mind is like, okay, if a baby is learning to walk, it's like, is there any would anyone ever be like, oh, that baby doesn't walk very good? Like that baby is like stumbling and it keeps falling
He
down.
needs to stop.
Like,
Like,
yeah, yeah, stop. Like
He's not very good at
maybe
this.
it's not for you. Maybe this whole walking thing isn't for you. Maybe you should just keep crawling on the floor. No one,
Yeah.
no one would ever say that, right? Because you need to find your footing. So
Hmm.
it's just about sticking with it. No one, like, it's the famous Malcolm Gladwell famously said that for anyone to become great at anything, you need to put in 10,000 hours to become
Yeah.
good at it. And that's just facts. Like, it takes practice to be good at something. And the other thing I thought of when it comes to being blocked creatively, I think creativity, again, it's not like an intellectual exercise. I mean, it is and it can be, but I think if you're too stuck in your own head and you're overthinking it, or you're over analyzing it, or you're being too logical and linear with it, that can cause you to be stuck. So like, I really recommend people dropping into their bodies and like living in the heart rather than the mind, because
Mm,
I think that ideas come to us through our emotions and our energy before they are intellectualized. So the more we
absolutely.
can
mhm.
be in touch with that heart space and kind of feeling our way forward rather than thinking our way forward, I think that's like a better navigational system for the creative process.
I love that you said that, and
Mm.
that you also touched on this whole 10,000 hours thing because,
Yeah.
with the upbringing that I had, the creativity for me was always just very blocked because it was this inner critic, this kind of editing as I created. It was this assumption that people like you, people like Bunny, just woke up and made a bunch of memes and posted them, and they were all just amazing right away. And so when you start to go to create, because this is the trap that I fell into, was, when I look at your content, I feel something. There's this
Mm,
deep resonance of, yes, like that hits. So I was waiting to feel that with my own creations, and I
mm,
realized soon after that that's not really going to happen because I'm on the receiving end. I'm seeing your content for the first time when you post it, where I'm in my head as I'm creating what I'm making. And so again, I think this encouragement to everybody to just keep going. I've read so many books on creativity and writing, like The Artist's Way, Writing Down the Bones, Stephen Pressfield. I love his books because he basically talks about that you just have to keep going past that point of thinking it sucks, and
yeah,
just writing as many rough drafts as you can. And in writing all of those is where you're going to start to find some of that gold. So I love that you touched on that.
totally. And also, it's it's really counterproductive to compare yourself to others, or to like think,
Yes.
why doesn't my own writing elicit that same emotion or sensation that I
Hmm.
get from this other writer? Because you're only going to succeed and excel with your own creativity by finding a voice that's uniquely your own.
Yeah.
Like, period. And we can take inspiration from people, and I think it's important, if you want to be a writer, to be a reader first. Like, I've read so much and I've taken inspiration from so many people, like from all throughout history, even more so than like modern like content creators. Like, I'm more inspired by like dead poets than I am like content creators or influencers.
Yeah,
So,
like I'm more inspired by Marcus Aurelius than anyone online talking about self-improvement.
totally. So it's really good to have I can just call them guides. Like, there's
Yeah.
different guides like that are maybe part of your creative lineage. Um, but
Mm.
Oh.
yeah, I think it's really important to like, people talk about different like spiritual lineages, and there's different like traditions. And I think of creativity like that, where it's like, okay, there are artists that came before you and that came before them. And it's like, where do you fit into this whole lineage and history of creatives. It's like I found this tradition of like mystical poets that goes back throughout history, and I can point to the people like Hafez and Rumi,
Mm.
William Blake and Walt Whitman and Allen Ginsberg. And there's like this thread of like mystical poets that I'm inspired by. I don't try to write like them, but while you're finding your own voice, it sometimes is helpful to even write in someone's style just to
Mm.
kind of practice. Again, it's a sandbox. So
Yeah.
like I think I probably did like at different points in my life write like a certain writer, and
Mm.
it's like I think of it almost like a teenager trying to learn their fashion sense. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we all went through a phase in high school or whatever when we're like, what's my style? And like you try on different outfits and um, different, you know, styles and until you find what really works for you. It's very similar to that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's actually a lot like singing too. I think a lot of like child singers, they kind of come out and start singing like Whitney and Mariah because they want to, go into these competitions and belt these out. And then as they get older, their voice completely changes once they find their own style. So it reminds me of that too.
Totally. I love this story. Like one of my favorite novelists is Jack Kerouac, who wrote this famous book called On the Road. And before he ever wrote any of his own novels, he wanted to know how it would feel to write the words of a great novel. So he took The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald and he typed it out word by word in its entirety,
Whoa.
just so he could like have a physical somatic sensation of what it felt like to write a great novel. Um,
Wow.
so and
What a
he
practice.
and his writing sounds nothing like F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? But there's certain things that we can integrate when we really take time to study other writers and figure out what makes them tick.
Whoa. I've never thought of doing something like that because it really is all about the feeling, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we have this agenda, like you said, and we want the creation to do something for us rather than it being about creating itself, right? I feel like we lose that. We're trying to do this very like means to an end process with creativity. Like, I'm going to create this song or I'm going to create this post. And then, whereas I think the greatest creatives are people who love to be in the process of creating. Like that's the best part. It's
Hmm.
not so much what happens at the end of it or what the creation does for me. It was I loved creating it. And I find what's so interesting is whenever we are really in love with a piece of work, we're so obsessed as a collective with knowing what the behind the scenes, like putting that together sort of process was. And so I feel like that's the part we're disrespecting so much. We're like, how do I create something good? Rather than how do I fall in love with creating? And so
Hmm.
I know in your book, you actually talk about this really beautiful yin and yang relationship
Yeah.
that creativity has. And I find that most people address creativity from the yang perspective. Like, how do I create? Like, how do I make stuff? And I'm curious to hear your response to that because obviously there's this balance and it's not all about the how, but about our intentions, our purpose, like you said. But how can we, or what words would you offer to someone who is really struggling from this yang mindset and trying to produce, that might be missing out on that more yin creative quality?
Sure. Yeah, when before I even had an idea for the book that became The Art of You, I started by I was just sitting down and trying to really understand like how creativity works.
Yeah.
I've been creative my whole life. I've always been a writer. I've made art. I've done so many different things. I'm like, how? Okay, let's really break down the science of creativity and how it works. And the first thing that came to mind is like, okay, on one hand, creativity is very spiritual because if you think about like what intuition is and like where ideas come from and being guided by a deeper purpose or even like imagination, like how does imagination work, like what is imagination, like we can conjure other worlds and dimensions in our minds but then we can also like bring them to life like that is amazing. Like that is really amazing. Like we are navigating other worlds and other dimensions through our intuition, through our
Mm-hmm.
imagination. Um, so on one hand, it's about like communicating with spirit and being a portal and a channel for inspiration. And this is the yin. And the yin and the yang, like the yin is kind of like the feminine principle of the universe. The yang is the masculine principle. Yin is about being and receiving, and yang is about action and doing and making. So on the other hand, creativity is about action. It's about making things. You are putting things together, you're constructing things, and you're building it and you're crafting it. So it's about making, and how do you find your style, and how do you experiment with technique, and how do you actually mess around with form and actually get things off the ground and launch them. So if you think about it, like the spectrum of creativity, it's like you're taking a thought which doesn't exist. A thought is, you could go deep into what, where intuition comes from, and there are other dimensions that are pure thought and pure energy that we can actually tap into, but then we can actually bring those ideas to life and manifest them into the physical world. And like it's kind of amazing when you think about that. We are portals, and we are bridges between the divine and the physical. And the role of the artist is to connect those worlds, and to bring
Mm.
thought forms to life through the creative process. So, we all bring things to life all the time, whether that's children or a book, or, you can make your dinner. Like
Yeah.
we're always like bringing things to life through the power of our creativity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, and yes, so I think that in terms of yin and yang, I think that we live in a society that is very much yang dominant. So
Mm-hmm.
this means like, this is why people call it like the patriarchy. It's all about doing and productivity and results, and it's like hierarchy and competition. So our whole economy and our society is built on the yang, and we measure success by productivity. And there are so many jobs that like you're getting things done and you're moving money around, and you are um you're like doing things with contracts, and you're doing things, but like is what you're doing actually helping anyone? I think
It's a
of
lot of
all
busy work.
I think of all the people that live in like that work in finance, that are just moving money around, and they're making so much money, but what value are they adding to the world? In fact, they're extracting value from the world and taking it. Um,
Mm,
Mm.
so we live in a world that's extremely out of balance,
yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think tapping into the yin is so critical right now for the whole world, and also for creators. Like I feel like when I was working in advertising in New York City, it was very fast paced, demanding job, and I was very productive. Um, but I realized that like after a while, I was working on fumes. Like I was when you're always just doing, you're not connecting with that inner purpose, that intuition, that starting from a place of stillness and inner presence. Then the work's not going to be rooted in purpose or meaning, and it's not going to have a deeper um, value that people are going to connect with. So I feel like you can only connect with others as deeply as you've connected with yourself. So from a
Mm-hmm.
creative perspective, it's so important to um, you know really have an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, and giving yourself space to rest, space to unwind, space to imagine, to wander, and let your cup be refilled through that, just being open-minded and curious and exploring life. And that's how we fill our own cup, which we can then pour into our art. So I feel like
Mm.
you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's so important like to be consuming art, to be like thinking and contemplating and resting, so we, you know, can have something to pour into our art, into our work, into our life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you shared that because I think a lot of people, especially, entrepreneurs, we kind of end up becoming these producers and editors and, we're editing these videos and all of a sudden we have to do this art form that none of us have really been trained in. But then we start to like pimp out our creativity. It's like we only
Mhm.
use it to monetize or to like promote ourselves. And
Mhm.
then we wonder like why I can't get any ideas. And it's because we're just hammering it down to like get something and produce something instead of, as you said, to have space, because that's really where we all get our best ideas, in the shower, when we're walking, like right before we fall asleep. And it's because we're in that more regulated, calm, peaceful state. And so I love that you touched on that. My next kind of question that I want to direct this conversation into is actually about editing. And this is something that I've struggled with a lot, and your book has helped me so much, and just your content in general, because, as someone has over the past few years made more contact with my creativity, gotten back into writing and writing music and poetry for the fun of it, not for any other reason, but because it feels like an expression of me. Part of what becomes so scary is the editing process, because the editing process feels a lot like the critic that I was trying to kind of get away from. And so I would make something and then I would think, okay, I need to edit this. But as soon as I heard this needs to be different, I would kind of be like, this is terrible. I need to throw out the entire thing. So, what you expressed in the book here was such a succinct way of explaining it, that there's a difference between expression and craftsmanship. So I would love for you to touch on this and explain to people about the editing process and how, you even said in here that during the craftsmanship process, that this is where your inner critic finally gets its chance to shine. And I love how you worded that. So please, I would
Yeah,
love to hear.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, you said it, like expression and creation and idea generation. For me, this is not the place for editing, for ego, for analysis. Um, I love this quote from one of my favorite poets, Allen Ginsberg, because he was big on consciousness and mindfulness as part of his creative practice. So he would just allow the words to come to him, and he would write them down as they came without second guessing them. And someone asked him, like, do you ever polish your poems? Do you polish them after you write them? And he thought about it and he says, no, but I polish my mind before writing them. So
Mm.
this is kind of the intersection of consciousness and creativity where,
Mhm.
and again, like some of my best ideas come to me unexpectedly. So I'm almost like taking dictation and just writing it down as it comes. And even if I have like my inner critic who's like, oh, I want to change that, I don't even, I just kind of quiet that voice and just like write what comes through. So it's really
Mm,
about trusting and trusting
yeah.
what comes through as it's coming through.
Mhm.
Now, having said that, I do believe in editing. I mean, I think the more experience you have as a writer, the less editing you're going to need to do, period. Because
Mhm.
you kind of just like, it's going to come through more, the flow is going to be more natural. So I think the more experience you have, the less editing is going to be required. But, I like tight prose and, you know, getting to the point, and, communication is a delicate thing. Like I think of stand-up comedians, and I love to like hear stand-up comedians talk about their craft. And like one of the all-time comedy legends is Jerry Seinfeld, and I love
Mhm.
him talking about writing jokes because he emphasizes how every single word matters. And like
Mhm.
you could say the punchline one way that won't work, but if you just tweak one or two words, it lands completely differently. So
Mhm.
I think that writers as communicators have a responsibility to say things in a way that's going to be understood. within reason. There are some art that's more just open for interpretation, and that's fine as well. But I want to be understood, and sometimes that takes editing. It's like, okay, how can I say this in a way that's people are going to resonate with, or they won't be confused by, or they won't misunderstand it. So,
Mm-hmm.
but so I do believe in editing, but I strongly believe that editing and creation are two different things, and they're two different
Yeah.
stages.
Yeah.
So, and that's why like we all have an ego, and some people are like, oh yeah, we want to kill the ego or like transcend the ego. And for me, it's like, no, the ego is helpful, but it's about knowing the right role to give the ego during the creative process. So I like to say,
Mm-hmm.
like, I kind of make a bargain with my ego. So like, to get my ego out of the way while I'm trying to ideate and download ideas, I'm like, okay, ego, like, you're gonna have a chance to look all of this over, but like, this is not your time. Like, you're not up to
Mm-hmm.
bat. Like, you're gonna be up to bat later,
Yeah.
because when you're editing, that is like the ego's time to shine, because the ego is
Yeah.
good at looking for problems, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety is like looking for problems. You're like looking, you're just like and you're finding problems that don't exist. So I think that you should not just be totally anxious about your work and find problems that don't exist. But I do think that maybe there are some problems that can be worked out. So, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like I scan my writing after, later on. Like, I'll usually write, and then, I'll come back later to really to edit. Completely different day, maybe even a different month,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I just scan it, and I'm like, is this landing? Does this feel right? And I try not to completely reinvent the wheel, but it helps to really give that final look to make sure it's communicating what was intended. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important and that's another reason why I think it's important to have good taste as a writer and as a creative. And you only get good taste by like consuming a lot of art. Like,
That's
Yeah.
so true.
one of my and I have different guides for different parts of the creative process. Like, I mentioned Allen Ginsberg.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he might be someone who I'm inspired by in terms of like how he connects his consciousness to his expression. But then I have other guides, like, I love the writer Joan Didion, because
Yeah.
her prose is so clean and precise, and I just know that she's someone who values editing and who just like
Yeah.
takes time to massage it to make it really punchy and impactful, right? So I kind
Yeah.
of feel like when I'm editing, I've got Joan Didion like over my shoulder, like looking at it, being like, you could probably tighten that up a little bit.
Yeah. And I think what's I love that. And I think what's really interesting about this is I think how you edit will of course be in direct proportion to what your purpose for the creation is.
Hmm.
Because for those who don't know, James and I actually have the same book agent. And she's been reviewing some of my stuff. And it's funny because I my ego wants to sound like I'm a good writer, right? Of course. So there's a lot of like words that I probably don't need to use, but like my own ego wants them in there. And she's like, and you know how Michelle is. She's like this very direct, like amazing attitude. And I mean that in the best way, but she's from like New Jersey. And she's like,
Yeah.
listen, Sam, is like the single mom with 3 kids going to understand what this means? Like when she picks up your book.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I have to remember who the book is for.
Yes.
Mm.
And when I remember that purpose, that also informs my editing process. And the way that I've actually assuaged my ego was that I told it, don't worry, we can write a self indulgent book of poems at a later point in time. Like, and you
Yes.
can self publish that on Amazon. Like, if you want to write this piece that you want no concise, tight prose and to really like sink through and like land in people's body, but you just want to create something that feels like fun and flowery and is what I mean? It's changed how I edit, I think, when I think about who it's for or what the purpose of the creation is, as opposed to if it's for my ego and I'm just trying to find my own sense of self-worth and importance through it, then yeah, I'm gonna have a very different editing process.
Yeah, totally. I think that there's a big difference between writing because you want to sound smart, or like you want to
Yeah.
sound like a good writer,
Oh yeah.
and writing to communicate a point.
Mhm.
Because I think that
I've
what
experienced both.
one mistake that a lot of young writers make is, especially like people who are are poetic or have a grasp of language, like using too many adjectives or too many big words, that it's kind of like using flourishes, or it's like, it's, is it helping you communicate what you want to communicate, or do you just want to like show off that you know that word, or that you can cram adjectives and accents and decorations into your sentences?
Yeah,
So I think it's
yeah.
best to avoid. And I learned this in graphic design school, because in graphic design school, like, it's, there's a big difference between art and design. Like,
Yeah.
design is purposeful. Design is like for a specific purpose. Like, imagine like designing the signage in an airport or a subway system. It's very intentional, and it's all about like guiding people and directing them. And if there's something that is excess, it's probably getting in the way. So I kind of
Yeah,
learned as
like
in,
cool sign.
yeah, but it's like, no, it's like, if it doesn't need to be there, then you should probably take it out. So I think about that with writing
Mhm.
as well. Like, if it doesn't need to be there, maybe you should take it out.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it really has been an interesting process creating and writing, because it's like different parts of me want the book to be one way, and then the book itself has its own energy and it's its own entity that wants to be a certain way. And what I'm realizing through this process, and I plan to be completed by the end of this year, but it's actually going to be a lot shorter than my ego wanted,
Yeah.
right?
Mm,
Like I think
mhm.
my ego wanted to like write a good work of art, right? But what I have to say and what I want to really land with the readers doesn't need to be said in that many words. And to your point about needing to consume for inspiration, one of my favorite books on consciousness is Awareness by Anthony DeMello.
Hmm.
And it's brief, and he is like to the point, and his style of writing does not try to beat around the bush very much at all. And so in consuming that and revisiting that, I'm like, okay, I don't have to write a long book for it to be impactful. And so, yeah, it's turning out to be, it's the creative energy that's coming through is actually different than what like my mental agenda and expectations were. And so I think that's an interesting relationship we have to learn to dance with creativity, because yeah, your ego is going to want it one way,
Yeah.
and it's going to want to be a different way depending on what the purpose is.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you could write a book that's 300 pages, or you could write basically the same book in 100 pages that's saying more or less the same thing, I think that is going to be a better book. Because it's about,
Mhm.
just cutting away the fluff and like getting it down to its essence.
Yeah, and do we even
Mhm.
need the book, right? Because your account, I
Mhm.
feel like succinctly like puts every single point, and like every point I was gonna make is like in about 5 words on your page.
Well, listen, that's an interesting observation, because I mean, I wonder, how long people will be reading books. And I don't think that
Mhm.
social media is a replacement for books, but I think that, you know communication and art, it's always changing, and I
Mhm.
think that our attention spans are getting shorter. So sometimes I'm like reading a book, and it's like there's so much excess that needs to be there, and I'm like, oh, this is rude, because they're like giving me more work to do,
Yeah.
get the point. um
Mm.
so there's something to be said about, yeah, like a meme which can communicate something that's impactful, um in just a few seconds. And I think
Mhm.
that's kind of like the secret of like making memes, is how can you, it's not shallow, it's a deep expression, and you're trying to
Mhm.
communicate something philosophical or spiritual or educational, but doing it in a way where you're kind of transmitting that information in this like kind of quick and precise way. um
Mhm.
so that's kind of my goal when I'm making social media content, is like, you're almost encoding it with more information than there are words there. It's similar to like there's the Japanese style of poem called the haiku.
Hmm.
It's
Mhm.
I always compare social media content to haikus because haikus are very
I love
short.
that.
So haiku
Yeah.
has 3 lines. The first is 5 syllables, the second is 7 syllables, and the third is 5 syllables. So it's a whole poem that's only 17 syllables. But the whole story of haikus is like a haiku writer will spend a lot of time in nature just observing and
Mm.
and um and just taking in the nature around them, like looking for this kind of like clarity that comes from something around them, and they
Mm.
communicate that into the word. So it's like it takes a long time to write something short.
So
Ooh.
true. So
Yeah.
true. Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes like I read a tweet and I'm like, that just changed everything for me.
Totally.
Like it's literally 1 to 2 lines. There's no punctuation even. And I'm like, wow, life changed. Like by
Totally.
a tweet.
Mm.
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting because one way that I like, kind of on the same vein, something that I've become aware of is that, yeah, attention is so precious nowadays because our attention spans are so short. And so I really value people's attention. And so when you are creating post or writing something, to honor that attention and, like, as you said, to make it easy for them to consume that information. And I do this with my daughter all the time, right? Like when I'm trying to teach her a life lesson, I'm not going to give her like, a TED talk about it, right? It's like, how can I first grab her attention and say kind of the one line that's going to really land with her? And then, reading the room, deliver in a way that's going to be received well with her. And so I love this connection of creating art as a form of communication, because I think that'll
Yeah.
help a lot of people who struggle with editing. It's not editing because you're bad. It's how can we help the person that's consuming this receive your message in a better way?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, think about the audience and getting outside your own head. That's why it helps to see, to share your work with others, or to have an agent or to have an editor that can like say, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to communicate this, but it's landing in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, relationships in general are important, because they show us our
So
blind
true.
spots, right? Like you need, we all think we're so great until we're in a relationship, right? or
That's so true. Because we're not seeing ourselves. We're not seeing ourselves clearly. We're just seeing our own our own like clouded judgments and assumptions. That's so funny. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of have a question that's pretty out of
Yeah.
pocket, but what do you as an artist think the future of art is going to look like?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think that again, it's always changing, and it's usually driven by technology in some way, shape,
Mm-hmm.
or form. Like we have whatever technology we have, like whether that was just cave paintings because people were just living
Right?
in caves and they had whatever access to whatever, paints they could, put together. And then people invented oil paintings and people invented canvas, and people poetry used to be oral tradition where people would memorize it and recite it to a group, and then written language was invented and people could write things down on scrolls, and then the printing press completely blew it open so you could actually reproduce books at scale and people could read them. And then being able to record things, whether that's like recording songs or um working with other technology. And now we're on social media and we're on the internet, and we have content creators and memes and songs that are engineered for TikTok, um
Yeah.
and things like that. So it's always changing, and I think it's human nature to be critical of the new things. Like it doesn't seem like it's
Yeah.
high art when something new comes around. Like one example I have of that, one of my favorite musicians is Bob Dylan, and he
Mm.
was he was a folk singer in the early 60s, and he made these very important songs that had like political meaning behind them, and they were serious kind of folk songs. And at the time, people forget that like when rock and roll first came out, like in the 50s, rock and roll was like teeny bopper music. Like it wasn't serious art. Like there had been no like serious poetic rock and roll. It was all just kind of like silly dance music. And then Bob Dylan was like, okay, I want to make rock and roll music, but I'm going to infuse it with my own like psychedelic poetry. And he like took rock and roll and made it into this like high art form. So I feel like that's always changing. We don't recognize it, what the relevant art form is until it's already happening or until it's already happened. Which is why there's always this kind of conflict and friction between like the kids and like the old people.
Yes.
Right?
Like we're going to look back and it's going to be like an art history class and it's going to be like in the early 2010s,
Yeah.
see here, James McCrae, the advent of the meme as a form of communication, right? And it is so funny to think about how we do this as a society. We hierarchically, rank art. Like I guess painting, I don't know if everyone sees it this way, but I think that people around me see it this way, that painting is like the highest art. Like if you say that you're artistic, people are like, oh, do you like paint and draw? I'm like, no, not at all. But there are so many other forms. And it's interesting that the way that we judge it may actually keep us from exploring those different mediums that may actually be the best for us to express ourselves through.
Totally. So I think that obviously artificial intelligence is kind of the new kid on the block. So I think, some people are, a lot of artists are like, oh, if AI can make art, then what role do artists have? But how I see that is AI is not a replacement for artists. It is a tool for artists to use. So what that's going to look like, I don't know yet, but I think it's going to be a toolbox that artists can use to either like, you already see it with like architecture or fashion where you can use AI for like, I would call it like rapid prototyping, where you can, use it to like create ideas of what like a certain house in a certain style might look like. So it's good for brainstorming and for ideation. And I think that once artists can kind of figure out a way to use AI as a, not to take away from their own expression, but to bring their own expression to life. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I think that's going to be a big part of the future of art.
It's absolutely going to be exciting to see. I also have kind of a random question. Out of all the memes that you've made, do you have like a favorite one?
Oh my goodness, I've got a few favorite ones. I don't even have them in front of me. I made one that was, I think was just more impactful than I ever thought it would be, which was, it just said, be the glitch you want to see in the Matrix.
Ooh, I remember that one. Yeah, I shared it.
And it had like some purple clouds in the background. And I really didn't think much about that one. Like, I remember I made it and I didn't even post it for like 2 months, I think, because I just had it on my computer and it was one of many memes that I had. And it just turned out to like have a much bigger ripple effect than I ever expected. And like people were going to like protests and they had like the meme like printed out and they were like using it as like a sign.
Wow.
At like various protests. So that's one. And there's another one that people really, really liked that more than I even thought they would. It was a fake Amazon review.
That was my favorite. That was my favorite. The one that says it was all woefully mismanaged.
Yeah, it was me, but I was reviewing Earth and my experience on Earth, but in the format of an Amazon review. And I think I gave it like
so good.
I gave it like 3 stars, and I said like, oh, I probably won't come back. So people really liked that one too.
I was going to I didn't know if you were going to say that one, but that was, I think, the first thing I saw you ever created.
Cool.
And it really affected me. Like it felt so honest and true and had this sort of, I guess, element of observer consciousness, like all wrapped up into it, and it was spiritual in its nature. And so I absolutely loved that. So if anyone hasn't seen these memes, you'll have to go and scour James's page. I mean, there's so many other ones, and I think that a lot of people, of course, too, are tapping into their softness era, their
Yeah.
regulation over hustle era, which you have also
Yes.
artfully communicated. But I'm kind of curious to close our co-creative conversation. I'm wondering what sort of themes or maybe even wounds you continue to spiral through on your journey to consciousness.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's, life is always a learning experience and a growth experience. And I try to every day just be open to what I'm feeling and be honest with it. Like, I'm still getting used to, I'm kind of a recovering overthinker.
Mm,
And a lot of what I write, like, I'm writing it because I'm learning it. Like, a lot of people like
yeah.
act like, oh, I have it all figured out because I write things in a way where it's like there's some wisdom that I'm sharing. But in reality, what I'm doing is I'm like writing down the lessons as I'm learning them.
Yeah.
So everything that I write is kind of a personal lesson. So it's like not forcing things, and to trust the unfolding of my life, even though I can't see where it's going, and
Mm-hmm.
to not compare myself to others,
Mm,
but just to show up for whatever I'm meant to show up for, and whoever's there will be there.
Mm,
So I think trust is just a big theme, and it has been for a while, because especially in the world that we live in now, where it's a lot of uncertainty in the world.
yeah.
Um, so trust is a big one. Like, I think there's no creative process without trust, because everything you do creatively is a little leap of faith. Like, if you're
yeah.
writing, you could write down any word in the world. There are thousands of words to choose from, but how do you know which word to choose? Or if you're making a painting, how do you know exactly where to put your brush? Like, these are all like leaps of faith into the unknown. So
Mm-hmm.
just trusting it, like one step at a time, one day at a time, even though you can't see the end result yet. But just having faith and trust in yourself that you're on the right path. That's a lesson that I'm always learning.
I love how
So
you said little
beautiful.
leaps. Every
Yeah.
little creative act that you rebelliously make is a little leap. And I was always told that you leap first and then the net will appear. So it kind of
Absolutely.
reminds me of that. Well, thank you so much, James, for sharing your light and your creativity with us and the world. You are truly the father of spiritual beings to me, and you
Yes.
will continue to be, and I will continue to share your content. But I think that our listeners will have felt so enlightened to hear this conversation, because we often don't get to see the artist behind the work, and you are someone who practiced. I mean, I don't think we mentioned this, but James had over like 15 years of creative and advertising marketing experience, and so he's not new to the game. But hopefully his journey and his life and his tips and insights on creativity inspired you to create without agenda and practice and fall in love with the art of making things
Mm,
rather than what the art makes you.
mm.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, James.
Thanks for having me.
This was the best. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.